A bit of context before I start. I've been making Minecraft skins for a little over a year now, and in that time my style has changed by quite a bit. Nowadays I look back at my first 45 or so skins and think about how far I've come. Just after I started, Planet Minecraft held an event called Sunshine After the Rain, where among other things, you could create summer themed skins. I went pretty much all out, making the maximum number of skins you could submit for the event. And to this day, I'm still quite proud of them, but there is one thing about the faces that bothers me a little. So I decided to remake them. Well, most of them anyway. See, I originally made 5 skins for the event, but I already remade one of those skins in December, around 6 months after I started making skins. Therefore, I decided to leave that skin out of this video. So with that, I guess we'll move on to the first skin, which is It Stopped Raining, or The Rain Has Stopped, depending on if you're on PMC, that's Planet Minecraft, or Skindex. I don't know why, but back in the day, and by back in the day I mean like for my first 3 skins literally and nothing else, I used to give each skin a different name depending on if it was on Planet Minecraft or Skindex. Now I only did that very briefly, but it was something I did, and looking back at it, I really don't know why I did it. What I do know is this skin was originally an entry for the Sunshine After the Rain event on Planet Minecraft, which I gotta admit was a lovely event. I really liked the theme there. It wasn't really a complex theme, it was just, making summer themed skins. A few people decided also to make skins that had a bit of a rain theme in them. This skin is one of them, so that's why there are so many like shades of blue. And as you see there, it's mostly a summer outfit. You got your sunglasses, your shorts, your t-shirt, that kind of thing. But then there's also a raincoat and a boot just on one side. So you can kind of, here's the rainy side, but on the other side is the sunny side. And to this day, I have to admit, I am quite proud of myself for doing that. Not the most creative thing, but, I am not a very original person. This skin, as you see, when I remade this, I decided to do out the entire base first before moving on to any shading. I'm a bit inconsistent when it comes to that. Usually I do out like most of the base before I start shading. But my point is, I'm not like some people where they like to shade every single part before even moving on to even just drawing out the base of the next part. I'm very different to that. I decide to, do out most of the base just in a very like one color format and then shade that. So that's what I'm doing here. As you can see, everything's all one color. I have the grid on here. I don't always use the grid, but in this case I did decide to do it. Now, I mentioned that there's a bit of a rain theme going on here. There are a lot of shades of blue, and I had to make sure to balance all those shades of blue in such a way that they would, not merge right into each other. Which isn't always the easiest thing, but I seem to manage it. As you can see right now, I'm pretty much finished up on the main base. I decided to make one major edit though to the original, and that was that I decided to extend the raincoat over to the other side, because that's kind of a style that I'd become accustomed to. So this is what it looks like, the base now. And now I'm moving on to the hair shading, which for this skin was pretty straightforward. Even most female skins, hair shading is not really that difficult. The main difficulty with hair shading comes with front hair, and specifically that's when you want to do the front hair shading in such a way that it's shaded sort of horizontally or diagonally, because shading it vertically is very intuitive. In this one I shaded it vertically, but if you're shading it horizontally, that can actually take up quite a bit of time. But obviously in this one I shaded it vertically, so that wasn't really anything I had to worry about. Then shading in the actual skin part of the skin, again, is something very straightforward. Once you have that down, like you have it down for life, you figure out what pattern you use, and then you use that for basically every skin. I mean, there might be a few tiny exceptions, but not that many. Everyone kind of has their style that they figure out, and once they have it figured out, they have it figured out. That was me. For quite a while though, I wasn't always like this when it came to shading skins. I used to actually use a lot more tones per color. So now, as you can see, most of the time I just use 3 tones. but back in the day I used to use like 5 for main parts and then use up to 6 or 7 tones for the hair. Now I just use 5 tones for the hair and 3 tones for everything else. And actually using fewer tones per like color in your palette actually can look a lot better because it looks more organized, it's a little less chaotic, it has less of that glow effect, which if you know anything about making skins, that is really something you want to avoid. You know, don't make everything feel like it's made out of metal or something like that. But as you see here, shading in the sides of the arms now, which is, you know, again, pretty straightforward. But then there's this little bit here where I spend quite a while figuring out how I want to have that jacket taper over to the other side. Because, like, you might think I'm good at skinning, but I'm still at the point where I forget stuff like the fact that I extended that over to the other side, which meant that all my struggling there was completely pointless because I just needed to extend it to the other side. Meanwhile, with the shorts here, you may notice I decided to go back over them to make the shading stand out more. Sometimes I do like twice the regular tone with shading. It's mostly a thing I do with like certain hues and then with shades of grey. Because usually there's a big enough contrast anyway, but sometimes if you're at like hue 60 or hue 180, or if you're dealing with shades of grey, it can be a good idea to use a greater contrast between each tone. I think I did the same for the socks there, and I definitely did the same for the sole of the foot, because I always do it with shades of white. I always use 100%, 90% and 80% value when shading white. But anyway, then I move on to shading the city and forest, which I do deviate very slightly from my usual shirt shading style, because I decided to kind of focus on the bottom of the green and light that up more and leave the top a little darker. So there's just a slight amount of divergence there. But as you see at this point, things worked out very well for me. All my shades of blue did not actually end up merging into each other. You know, that's something to kind of worry about. But in this case, it worked out very well, and I actually got quite a nice result. As you can see right here, just finishing up the sleeves of the jacket, and there it is. So now on to the next skin. This is Inner City Sun, or I think the other name is Sun of the City. I forget which one is Skindex and which one is Planet Minecraft, but it's not really important. We're just going to call it Inner City Sun when it releases. So this skin is actually quite a bit simpler than the last one I did. There isn't really any like complex layering here. It's just a summer city boy, literally. But this time I decided to actually use the palettes. So the only time I didn't was for the eye color, because that's the only time that color is actually used. You see here on the hat I use a light grey color, and you will see that color repeated again later on, I believe, with the shorts and possibly also the shoes. I can't remember, but they'll appear in a moment. Ah yeah, there they are. So you can see I used that lighter shade of grey on the shoes. So yeah, using the palettes is actually quite good, but it does take a bit of getting used to, and in this case I'm not sure it actually saved that much time, just because I'm, you know, so accustomed to using the like color picker tool that I keep forgetting the palettes are there, so that like takes a second off me. You know, so it's kind of inefficient that way, but if you got used to using palettes, then that could definitely save quite a bit of time. So you can see right here, this skin is definitely simpler than the last one I did. There are no complicated graphics. It's basically just the equivalent to text I've done on the t-shirt. The base again, I decided to do out most of this base before I started to shade anything. The only exception, I believe, was the eyes. There's one time there where I get a bit confused, so I start doing out the tones that I'll use for the skin. The skin tone is the same as the last skin I did, but the next two skins after this will use different tones. So it's not really that important, it's just something to keep in mind. like that I do reuse the same colors a lot, but you know, that's normal. You're not really expected to come up with different colors every single time, especially if you like to keep a consistent spacing when shading your colors. You will end up using like some of the same specific colors on multiple skins. But anyway, doing this skin, I decided to go a slightly unusual route here, and I start shading like from the body first. A lot of the time I will start with the head, but in this case I decided to do things slightly different. So then I went down to the feet, and you'll notice here again on the shades of grey that I decided to use steps of 10% in the value when shading, but on other colors I usually tend to use steps of 5%. Not really that big of a difference. You do notice it a bit, but only really if they're side by side. So then shading in the shorts and shading in the legs, that's simple enough. Again, you just kind of have those patterns figured out and then use the same pattern each time, and it, you know, can be a bit tedious doing the same thing over and over, but you know, you never really get confused when doing it, which is nice. And then shading the hair, since the hat is facing forwards, I don't need to do anything complex on the back. When I have a hat facing backwards, I like to do a bit of a shadow effect, which means basically just darken the hair on the middle of the back of the head. But in this case, I don't need to do that. So just finishing up here, again, is simple enough. I do think I cross-referenced a few parts, but I really can't remember what those parts are. It doesn't appear that I took any major pauses, unlike in the last skin, which I actually cut out one of the pauses because it was just that long. So you see here, finishing up, just adding a few extra little things, just to make the shorts, for example, pop out more. Then I do the usual shading with the shoes, and then I finish up the last few details, and there I go with Inner City Song. So now moving on to the third skin. This one is to the beach. It's sort of more of a tropical skin rather than just a summer theme. You know, just to be a little more themed, a little more aesthetic, I decided to make this one. In terms of design, it's not really a complicated concept. I mean, it's, you know, it's just a beach skin. But it did take a little longer than the others. In fact, this took about as long as the first skin I did, and the first skin I did took way longer than it should have. So this one, I mean, you can see there, I'm just even trying to pick what shade I should use for the straw hat. It does take a little bit of time. So I do use the palettes for this one, as you can see. I'm finally deciding on what shade I actually want to use, and I add it there. Then I add in the shades of beige, I guess it is. There's this recent skin, well, it's not that recent by the time this video goes up. There's a skin I saw by, I forget the creator, but I'll put a link to it in the description, and they did it really well. So you can see here, I once again decided to do most of the base before I started shading, but there is one exception, and you'll notice that I didn't do any of the flowers yet, because those do get quite complicated, so I usually decide to leave them out until a little bit later on. You'll notice as well in the coming minutes that I pause quite a lot making this skin, and that's just because there's so much to cross-reference. I mean, I need to cross-reference what the old skin looked like. I need to see what I do with my current style when it comes to things like the straw hat, which you'll see me pause on, and a few other details as well. But one of those details is not how to shade the inner parts of the arms, because again, when you just figure out how to shade the skin part of your skins, and then that's how you always do it. It's just like a consistent style you develop, and it is a little difficult at the start to figure out, but once you have it figured out, it's very straightforward. Then I spend a bit of time shading in some of the accessories, like the flip-flops, the sunglasses, the band on the hat. And then I decided to shade in the hat, so you will see a pause there, and once again that's just to cross-reference how I actually shade this kind of thing. So I think I looked at the skin I made for Unbreakable, which to this day still one of my favorite skins. I'm really proud of that. But this skin is turning out pretty nicely as well too. So now I'm shading in the Hawaiian shirt. You'll notice I haven't added in the flowers yet. That doesn't come until near the end. So right now I just kind of imagine it as just a blue shirt. You saw a pause there, and that was actually me checking one of those Rocket League X Monster Cap Volume 3 skins. You know, when I did all those tropical skins, just to see how like I do the lining again, kind of like, it's not really inside the arms, but it's like next to the arms, you know what I mean? Yeah, it's kind of hard to explain. But then you'll notice there's one slight difference. I decided to do a slightly different color on this one than on those Rocket League X Monster Cap Volume 3 skins. Basically, it's meant to emulate this sort of Cuban style, you know, that like notched design. So I do make it slightly larger, but finally now the flowers are starting to go in, and I spend quite a while at this, and you'll see several times I'll paint one and then get rid of it and paint it in a different location, because getting them all to align properly and look natural. Like, one of the toughest things is to not make it look like they're actually like in a sort of calculated pattern. You know, that you want them to look organic, like they're actually put somewhere. Like they're not just like calculated. You know, you want it to look sort of random but still good, and that is often not easy. So you saw there I had to like relocate one of the flowers. But then shading these flowers in isn't that difficult. What I first do is just shade it according to like my usual shading pattern, and then kind of adjust things a little bit for the petals. So you see these green bits going in, that's just meant to like represent a little leaf off each flower. It's a little bit of extra detail. It's not really that necessary, but I do think it looks nice. So now I'm adding the flower colors to the palettes, because I'm going to be switching these colors around a lot. So I need to make sure they're easily accessible. So then you see me adding in first according to the usual shading pattern, and then I go back along them and kind of give it more of a petal design, as you can see there. So what do I think of the skin? I think it turned out really well, once again. But you do notice there, I feel like I went a bit too far with the orange, so I decided to tone down that shading a bit. In fact, I think I removed the hue shading, hue shifting altogether. But once I do that, I end up with a really nice skin. Just a few tiny details left to finish off. And then I have remade To the Beach for the Sunshine After the Rain event. So now this last skin is probably the simplest skin out of all of them. There are no complicated patterns. There aren't really even any accessories apart from the sunglasses, I guess. It was originally meant to be a sort of sunset theme, but it didn't really turn out that way, because you'll notice with that skin I didn't use any blue, you know, because that's the color of the sky, which I thought at the time that would represent the sunset more. But if you really think about it, using blue actually makes sense in a sunset theme. And also I didn't use any like reds or oranges, which of course that would make the sunset theme more clear as well. My intention behind using the sunset theme was to kind of fit well as the last skin in the Sunshine After the Rain event, because, you know, it was a sunshine theme event, so last skin, sunset, you know, that kind of deal. That's kind of why I started off with the rain theme, and then I went into the sun. So there's a little bit of a chronology to the order of my skins, and I am really reading into this way too deeply. You'll notice though on that right leg that there's a bit of an error with the shorts. I made the leg like too narrow, and I actually don't get around to fixing that until the very end. So if that's something that bothers you, well, you'll just have to deal with it until I fix it. But I do fix it, so, you know, I don't end up leaving the skin finished with just that little error in there. I do actually get around to fixing that. So shading these shorts, that's pretty straightforward. I do steps of 10% because it's white. So the difference between 100% and 95% is often very hard to pick up. So I go from like 100% to 90%. Sometimes I go to 85, but nowadays I've decided mostly to go to 80%. And then shading the hair, I mean, most of it is the same as always. So like doing the top is the same as always, doing the sides is normal, doing the back is the same as usual. I do these little outer details on the outer layer just to add a little bit more depth. But then when I get around to shading the front hair, you will notice that I did things slightly differently this time. So I decided to shade the front hair in a horizontal or diagonal pattern, depending on how you look at it. And as I mentioned earlier in this video, that does make things a little more complicated. In this case, I didn't dwell on it really for that long, but there have been other times when making skins when that would take up like half the duration of making the skin. Okay, I'm probably exaggerating there, but it can take up quite a bit of time, because it's always the case that things just don't always seem right. But in this case, it turned out very well. So just finishing up the last few details, and then I'll be finished the remake of It Will Rise Again. So before I go, let's compare the old and new versions of each skin. And just as a little bonus, here's the skin I remade in December. So as you can see there, that's a pretty big improvement across the board. I plan to remake more of my old skins in the near future, so if you're interested, subscribe to the channel by clicking on your left and turn on notifications. And if you liked the video, then be sure to click the like button down below. Thanks for watching, and have a good night or day.